Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
It's December.
It's still a December episode?
Yep.
Oh. Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
And it's me, Jackie.
Oh, everyone loves that running gag where you guys are going to switch the order at some point, but based on our recording schedule, no one knows what date this is coming out. Hopefully you, the listeners, will be receiving this episode on time. Well, this is not a podcast about scheduling other podcasts. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles. This week being no exception. And to talk about this article, I think we all should just take a moment and wait. But I don't want to wait anymore. I hate it too, Jackie.
I hate waiting.
That probably means we're big failures in life. We're failures and we're dumb and we have high BMIs because we can't wait. You know, it's the most important skill of all time, waiting.
I actually have no self-control. And that's what today's topic's about. Let's just talk about
It's about self-control.
It's about self-control. And I was going to tell you a funny story that there's an article that we're going to reference today about the Marshmallow Test, which every psychology student has heard of, right? And I did it once summer last year during lockdown with my child, and I used like those jumbo marshmallows that are like bigger than your head. I took a videotape of it, and I was like, now if you cannot eat this marshmallow while I like go to the other room, I'll give you 2 of them. And she's like, cool. And then I literally like did this, and she was like, And then I was like, could I wait? And I was like, no. Nope,
Yep.
I can't either. So it's okay. That's evidenced by my lack of, self-control when I drive by a Starbucks every day.
It's true. But, we're going to be talking all about self-control. We're going to be talking about delay of gratification. We talk about the Marshmallow Test and beyond, because this is, again, a topic that while behavior analytically, we sort of, I think some researchers looked at self-control in one way. Psychology has looked at self-control in a completely different way. And as we found out, nobody seems to get self-control right or has the greatest grasp of exactly why self-control is or is not important, whether we can actually change people's self-control or not change their self-control. And then I guess the big question of, is it even worth trying to target self-control, at least in the way of self-control like we think of as the delay of gratification. So I'm not going to eat this thing that's right in front of me. Is it a valuable skill for young children to learn? Because as the research has told us in the past, perhaps not accurately, it's the biggest correlate between becoming a CEO of a Fortune 500 company and being a big old schlub.
I know, that made me like very sad. Like when I was reading the abstracts of the articles that were not mine and quickly like glancing at it, it's like, if you can't wait, people are, or if you waited, you'll have 700 standard deviations by the time you're 15.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, obviously a lot is going on there. But
do you want to be the psychologist with that right. Kid? Be like, Mom, Dad, I have some great news. Your kid waited 15 minutes to eat 2 marshmallows. They're going to Harvard. Start saving your pennies.
You did
They're
it,
locked.
right?
But the reason is they fell asleep on the floor.
You obviously don't have good bedtime hygiene.
So we've got a lot of articles today. Some of them long, some of them short.
I love doing the articles.
Do you love doing the articles?
Yeah.
All right, you do the articles then. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, yeah, we have 5 different articles.
Or do you want to wait till January to do the articles?
Well, if you...
No, I'm kidding.
I want to do them now. Now, Rob, now.
If you only waited 15 minutes, you'll be a success instead of a bum.
I'm doing it. I can't wait for this. Okay, so we have 5 articles that we're going to talk about today, hopefully in quick succession. They are
15 minutes each one, and then you get 2 more articles to talk about when you're done.
Nom. Revisiting the Marshmallow Test, a conceptual replication investigating links between early delay of gratification and later outcomes by Watts, Duncan, and Kwan. That was in Psychological Science 2018. Then we have Evaluating a Board Game Designed to Promote Young Children's Delay of Gratification by Onsman Frasca, Singh, Curry, Torriello, Epstein, Faith, Reardon, and Pape. Published in Frontiers in Psychology.
Wow. Like Little House on the Psychology Prairie.
2020.
We're going to play Oregon Trail to get there.
Next up, Rational Snacking young children's decision-making on the marshmallow task is moderated by beliefs about environmental reliability. It's one of those where they give away the ending and the title. Kid, Palmeri, and Aslin, published in Cognition 2013. We're like in the big leagues here. And then we have Teaching Self-Control to Small Groups of Dually Diagnosed Adults. That's by Dixon and Holcomb, published in JABA 2000. And finally, Self-Control, Teaching Tolerance for Delay in Impulsive Children by Schweitzer and Suzler-Azaroff, published in JAB, Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior, 1988.
Ooh.
Yes, we have quite the array of publications and years to pick from.
And so as you all heard in the dates, self-control research is not a new phenomenon. It is a rather old phenomenon. I'm going to do a quick summary of sort of where the idea of self-control research came from. I could do a quick song about this quick summary.
Phenomenon.
So a quick summary of articles we're not discussing, but get cited in every single article I think we discussed tonight. And that is the work of the psychologist Mischel, starting in 1972. Because pretty much everything that we think of and that every psychology or psychology undergrad student has ever heard about the idea of self-control comes from work on delay of gratification done by Mischel, and then later by other colleagues with Mischel on Shota, but studies on this so-called marshmallow test. And in case you've never heard of the marshmallow test, it really is just a means of putting out a preferred candy. I think it was originally marshmallow or pretzels. They don't call it the pretzel test, though. That's not as fun, I guess. Really trying to see if you put this food that the child says they want to have, and you give them the option of you can either eat this now, or actually, it's not eat this now. It's you can either wait for some period of time, originally it's 15 minutes, and you can have 2 of these items, or you can ring a bell. That's something they don't tell you that maybe in your undergrad. You can ring a bell to signal me, and then I'll come back and let you eat it right then and there. And the idea of the children who were able to wait the longest later on in these longitudinal studies would show higher scores in cognitive measures and in academic achievement, and they'd have lower BMI. I mean, that we're kind of joking about that at the beginning, but that was one of the findings in one of the longitudinal studies. And this has led to lots of other work in psychology looking at things like grit and how important these skills are for children. And this is one of those areas of research that I think always sounds really good. There's something there, but if you're just looking at like someone's Facebook feed or you just learned about it in undergrad, it may be one of those phenomena that are more popular and sound exciting than they might actually be, important to the average person. When we look at self-control and say the behavior analytic literature, well, it, kind of Schweitzer, Suzler-Azaroff sort of, have the big definition, which is this idea of maximizing behavior in a manner that permits an individual to gain access to larger reinforcers after a relatively longer delay, instead of choosing the smaller reinforcers after the short delay. And so that we'll talk about that study itself. When we talk about self-control in a psychological definition, there are lots of definitions because psychology. But that would sort of be the idea of skills related to gratification delay, impulsivity, being conscientious, having self-regulation skills, having high executive functioning skills. There are even more mentalistic kind of and conceptual definitions of self-control, which I'm just going to I can't remember if this was a quote from my notes, but self-control involves inhibitory control, where you restrain a dominant or desired response and execute a subdominant response.
That was a quote, yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah. I don't think I'm going to come up with that one, but I didn't put quotes around it. I usually do.
You wrote from Ansman-Frasca.
Yes, that was the Ansman-Frasca definition. Or the idea that one can resist temptation of distractions and complete goal-directed activities successfully. So however you want to define it, it has something to do with the idea that I'm able to wait, and while I wait, maybe I do something else related to some greater goal. Mostly these articles today are talking about the delay of gratification and sort of future planning, kind of planning your actions for later. But they have something to do with waiting to take the more reinforcing option.
The road less traveled.
Or more traveled. It depends on the group. As we'll hear in some of the critiques of the Mischel argument and the groups of preschoolers they used for those studies. So Dinah, this was a topic that you wanted to talk about. I know you found it interesting. I found it a bit silly myself, but entertaining in a intellectual way as well. But I know you had some thought. I find everything entertaining in an intellectual way.
Oh, you're such
me.
an intellectual. That's why. Yes. Well, I threw this idea out there. I was like, what about self-control? And everyone said, okay. So that was, my initial interest was just really in passing. But we do reference the behavior, quote unquote, of self-control in some of the behavior analytic literature. But it's one of those terms that once again has, been borrowed from developmental psychology. And when we take a second to attempt to operationally define what we really are calling self-control, there is a lot to unpack. As you have already unpacked, it's already unpacked. It's already on the table. So I don't need to do that again necessarily. But it's one of those concepts where when you're trying to break it down, you're saying, what all is going on here? And it's not so simple as just waiting, right? Because waiting is hard to define, as it's likely the absence of behavior anyway, right? But all of these studies that talk about delay of gratification are doing so within the context of presentation of some type of initial rule. So I'm going to leave for a minute, and when I come back, you can have 2 of this delicious thing, right? So already we've moved away just from waiting or, allocating responding away from one activity towards another competing activity or contingency towards something that now involves rule-governed behavior and responding and some level of listener understanding of a relatively complex idea. So it's not just so simple as that. And when you start to add that in, you recognize that a lot of this literature is pulling from a pretty specific type of arrangement. But the idea of self-control is then extrapolated out into all sorts of other areas, and the implications have been pretty far-reaching. And I love that you brought in the idea of grit, Rob, as well, because you guys know that I love Freakonomics. And, Angela Duckworth now gets thrown into that category too. But there's been some criticism of the idea of grit because it does the same thing here of chasing behavior back inside the body and making attributions of one's behavior toward personality traits rather than a history of reinforcement. And some of that criticism comes from placing individuals who've had hardship or trauma in their lives, and instead of recognizing how those environmental arrangements have impacted them, saying that their behavior is due to grit instead. So it's kind of a good point to bring in when we're thinking about how the self-control literature may be evolving and bringing in other new and different terms over time. So if you're not seeing self-control, you might be seeing other terms too. But I thought this topic was really interesting because there's behavior analytic research related to it, and then there's psychological research related to it, and they're really coming at it from different perspectives, which is why we have some research tonight that is psychological research and some research that's behavior analytic research. And so both of these viewpoints are coming at it from like a developmental perspective or behavioral perspective and thinking about what's really influencing what we're calling self-control, right? So is it the current environment? Is it historical variables that are present? Or is it this idea of personality, right? You come sort of better or worse equipped to have self-control or have self-controlling responses. And how much we can change our own self-control is also kind of wrapped up into this question too. So as behavior analysts, we might say, oh, we can totally make changes to our self-control, right? It's just behavior. We can make changes to all sorts of behavior. But there is a strong body of literature suggesting that young children cannot do the marshmallow task almost across the board, right? So there is a developmental readiness component to what we're calling delay of gratification here. And that really does need to be recognized. And then on the psychology side, the idea that this is some innate personality trait that one might be bringing is disregarding historical variables, environmental variables that are likely playing a role in how much one can delay gratification at one given point in time. So I feel like neither party really has the whole picture there because there are all of these different considerations that need to be made. And the literature sort of reflects that. So each side is almost starting to meet in the middle when thinking about how we should talk about self-control. But in my view, no one's really kind of got it all right? So the literature is a little bit messy, a little bit all over the place, and we can all learn from what one another is bringing into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it interesting. Short answer.
Like two 20-somethings meeting each other for the first time. They're a little bit messy. They're a little bit all over the place. Just kidding, 20-somethings.
I think there's something there.
There's something there. Anyway.
All right. Well, so that's kind of the little bit of a background. Before we get into our articles, let's, bring everyone up to speed. So we talked about 1972, Michel and the Marshmallow Test / pretzel test. One thing that I did not mention at the front is this study was done at the Stanford University preschool, which, for those of you who are thinking about possible confounds as to why would the kids who go to Stanford University preschool go on to be super successful, I would guess it might be because also their parents or most of their parents are Stanford University professors. Maybe not all of them, but a good portion of them are going to be. And I would bet that they probably are going to end up doing okay for themselves.
Well, because they probably have a lot of books in their home.
They have a lot of books, which is the only correlate. That is a correlate. Freakonomics tells us that is a correlate between future success. Number of books. Not reading them, but well, might be reading them. We don't know.
That's why we never get rid of a single book.
No, you got to keep them all. That's the only way to make your kids smart.
You just gave me some, so your kids are infinitely less smarter now.
No, we failed. But in any case, actually, the original study did not do that correlation with the later scores because they certainly couldn't. But there were also additional kind of modifications to the task. What if we tell the kids to remind themselves of the great goal they're getting? What if we give them a slinky to play with? And
right.
so kind of the original study had more to do, I think, with the Schweitzer, Suzler-Azaroff study of if you give kids something to do, they seem to wait a little bit better. That was kind of the take-home point of the 70s study. At least in some of the summaries I was reading, I was able to kind of define in psychological literature. But where it really came to be exciting in terms of to society as a whole was that idea of this skill leads to future success, which that would not come until much later in time. I think actually after the first article we're going to discuss, which is the Schweitzer and Suzler-Azaroff study. But the idea of self-control and waiting for food with young children was hot in the zeitgeist in the 70s and 80s. And that brings us up to this 1988 study, kind of looking at that question. So our first couple articles, we're going to talk about, hey, can you change delay of gratification in terms of the amount of time children will wait for some item, some toy or edible item? So that's the first part, is can you do it? Is it possible?
Yeah.
And the short answer is yeah, kind of, I guess. So let's talk about why.
Do you want to tell them what part 2 will be as a spoiler?
Oh, I mentioned it a little bit at the top, but part 2 is going to be more about is there a value in doing that?
As a summary, because you said part 1, and then if people were not 100% good. Okay.
Well, Jack, you ruined it. Now they're all going to turn off their podcast machines because they know what we'll talk about later. It was a teaser.
But they don't know our answer.
Oh, okay.
Right? The answer is can we and should we? Those are 2 questions.
And the answer is always kind of yeah, kind of maybe.
That's not my answer.
That seems to be always the answer. Every time we ask a big question, we expect this binary response. Sort of.
That's why people listen, to get the baby.
They love it.
I never expect a binary response for anything.
That's why everyone loved the end of Serial, where they're like, was he a killer?
Okay.
That's why Rob and I get along, because you're so black and white, and I live in the gray.
That seems like you wouldn't get along. Or because, right? Maybe not. I don't know. I can't get it. I don't know.
That sounded like your dating profile. The gray.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
Go ahead.
So I want to talk about the Schweitzer and Suzler-Azaroff article. And this is the article from 1988. So this is our oldie but goodie article. And they start this article talking about basic research and looking what, Skinner and and Charles Forster found in early laboratory settings, looking at self-control literature and delay of gratification. So what they suggested, and they top it off with, is talking about how basic research demonstrated that the delay between the response and the reinforcer would affect choice. We're all like, duh. But right back then, they're like, oh, cool. And reinforcer effectiveness decreases as delays increase. And they also suggested that this basic research showed that responses followed by shorter, smaller delayed reinforcers are more probable than responses with larger reinforcers and longer delays. And so based on that basic research, 2 hypotheses, I guess one would say, have been created. And, one of them is one that's on the task list, which is the matching law. And so, right, the matching law says that responses will be allocated toward the same amount of reinforcers, right? So more reinforcers, you're going to have more responses. Less reinforcers, you're going to have less responses. And there will be a switch when the delay is more evenly distributed. So in the research, they thought as you take the smaller reinforcer and add more delay to it, and you take the larger reinforcer and add less of a delay to it, you will see a switching of or an allocation of responses in the other direction. And then they said that, I love this, they said children and pigeons. Children and pigeons, put them in a little box together, see what happens. But they always are more than likely would pick smaller, less delayed reinforcers, even when offered the larger alternative of the larger reinforcer that are available only after delay. And another hypothesis that has tried to unpack this idea is the delay reduction hypothesis. And what this one suggests is that organisms will choose stimuli that are correlated with the greatest time reduction to primary reinforcement. But even that still supports this previous assertion that children and pigeons will choose smaller, more immediate reinforcers than those larger with a bigger delay reinforcement. So they also suggest that choice behavior may be correlated with age. I like that. And verbal ability. I think it's probably more the verbal ability and less about the age, but that's okay. Maybe with age comes, more history of reinforcement and whatever, but I don't think it's age in and of itself, right? You can't be like 50 and you're like, oh, I'm 50 now. I'm going to choose the larger reinforcer.
Right.
Right. There's other things.
For kids, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's because of other things, right? It's not just because their age.
Yep.
And so I said rule-governed behavior is probably at play, though, or a lack of adjunctive behavior with young children, right? They just don't have they don't know what to do in between those times. So they're like, I'm not doing anything. And so previous research suggested that children will wait longer when the reinforcer isn't visible, or if they could distract themselves with fun things to do, like singing or talking to themselves. So these authors wanted to examine the effectiveness of a procedure designed to increase the proportion of children's choices of larger delayed over smaller immediate reinforcers with children known to be impulsive. So they went to 2 preschools and asked teachers whether they had preschool children that had hyperactivity or were known to be impulsive in the classroom, or both. And based on that, they had 6 students ranging in age from 3.8 to 6 years in the study. And 1 child was in the pilot study. So they tried it out with 1 and then did it with 4 others. And one of them was supposed to be their control child. So the control trial, they wanted to see if they could account for maturation, right, with that control child. So the control child got the pre-assessment and the post-assessment, which was no training and no training. So I think that's funny. And they labeled their children as letters. So A through F. We didn't have pseudonyms at that time.
They hadn't been invented in 1988.
Yeah. Okay, so I call this a cute little presentation board, but it's kind of scary. And so what they did is the experimenters brought the children into the room and said, we're going to play a game. And they set them up next to this little presentation board. So the presentation board was vertical. Is that vertical?
Yeah.
Yep. I always get vertical and horizontal, Ryan. So that's why I have to do this. So it is a vertical board. And so the vertical board blocks the experimenter. So the experimenter's behind the vertical board. And on the vertical board, there is a picture of a clown right in the top. Right? Everybody hates clowns.
Awful. So awful.
I don't think people used to hate clowns as much.
Became a thing.
I think it's because of it.
Okay,
It had
yes.
been published at the time.
But it wasn't a movie yet.
No, it was not a
So,
movie yet.
I dressed up as a clown every year for Halloween for many years in a row.
So everyone was so scared
Probably
of
actually
you.
in 1988, I almost guarantee you I was a clown.
You know what? I was too. But anyway, scary. So the clown's there.
It was very scary.
The clown's got a big red nose. Go ahead, Rob.
Have you seen that? You ever see that movie Return to Oz? It was like the sequel
Oh my
in
God,
the 80s.
yes.
It reminds me of at the beginning when they're like, Dorothy, you went to Oz. We're going to use electroshock therapy on you. And they show the doctor showing her this like little machine. It's got all these like dials and this little lever. I saw the diagram in the article. I said, oh God, it's giving me like turn of the 20th century fry your brain machine vibes from the whole thing. And it's a clown too. So it's just
steampunk action.
bad on all aspects.
But for the listeners that aren't looking at the article, so it's a
vertical, it's terrifying.
No, it's a vertical board, and on the board, up on the top in the middle, is a picture of a clown, right? And what's notable about this clown is that the nose and the eyes are lights. Okay, so that's important to know. And then below the clown, probably if you were looking at it on a computer screen, it's like one mouse. You know, your little mouse thing. Like one mouse below.
They look like garage door opener buttons.
Yeah, so then there's two little buttons there, but they're not buttons, they're lights. So there's two little lights below the clown. Those are going to come in handy later. And then my favorite thing is that on the side, on the right-hand side, I think, or the left-hand side, there's a little, they call it a door viewer, but then in parentheses they put peephole. And did I laugh so hard there? And they kept calling it a door viewer because I think they felt creepy putting peephole in their thing. So they have the peephole so that the
it's like a divider though. Like clearly, I mean, the kid clearly knows there's an adult like hiding on the other side of this thing.
But we don't know if it's made of, like, they don't tell us what it's made of. So I'm imagining it's made of heavy wood because it couldn't have been a divider because they had to put all the electrical stuff in it. So I'm imagining it's
I need to see
wood.
the table. I'm like imagining, Suzler-Azaroff's like crouched behind this little thing, staring at the people, and the kid's like, "What are you doing, dude? Like, just put the reinforcer in the box. Let's go."
Right. So the peephole's to the side, right? So the experimenter can still view the child. But then on the bottom, there are two boxes, and I love the specific detail they talked about with these boxes. They're like furniture. They can come in and out, and they don't come all the way out, and they don't come all the way in, and I can pull them back and push them forward so kids can't get the reinforcer until it's time. But so the boxes,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, the boxes are like furniture boxes, so they look like drawers. They could have just said that. They could have just
called it a drawer.
Yep.
A furniture box doesn't have any meaning to me.
Nope. So it's a drawer, and the drawers have different colored tops, and the different colored tops during the training were associated with the amount of reinforcers in the box, but they weren't associated with the amount of reinforcers reliably across trials during pre-assessment and post-assessment. So that's important to note. Okay, so there we go. So the reinforcers were varied, and they include stickers, which they called peel-off pictures. Man, was this my most favorite article for they're like, can we use the word stickers? I'm not sure. Is that trademarked? Let's call them peel-off pictures and put stickers in parentheses, but then continue to call them peel-off pictures.
This article is like that Strange Planet comic. The guy, like the aliens who like make up their all the terminology for the human things. Do you guys not know this?
No.
It's really funny.
Where is it?
On the internet.
Oh,
they're like
it's
little alien people.
I'll look at it. It sounds like something I would love. But I just love that. So some of the students received edibles. Some of them received peel-off pictures. No, wink, wink, wink.
Wink, wink.
Some of the students, I think, at the end, spoiler alert, could have used edibles to be more potent, but teachers wouldn't let them. So they put that as one of like a limitation in this study. So at the beginning of the session, they asked the child what they wanted to work for, showed them what was available. And they also had, I love this too, they had a cardboard box nearby. So if the student couldn't consume their reinforcer, they could stick it in the cardboard box so it wasn't visible, but they could get it at the end of the session. I just like, they're like, there's a cardboard box with a slit in it. And then you put your toys inside. So anyway, this was a thoroughly enjoyable article to read. purposely for that.
And
Okay.
it sounds like really technologically sound as well.
Yes.
So much detail.
So much detail. You're right. All right. So then, right, they took data by peeping through the peephole, and they took note of any significant issues. They said if there was problems at schools, if kids were crying, running away, choice, and reinforcers. I like that those are the last things, right? The
Right.
DVs are the last things that they talk about.
Yeah.
They talk about everything else before the DVs. Okay. So the general procedures are highlighted lovely in a table. In a little like flow chart, which is so nice.
They clearly typed flowchart, like in it with a typewriter, and then
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
somehow cut and
typewriter,
pasted.
and it's like super hard to read for
Mhm.
people that have bad vision like me. I had to be like open my eyes
is hard
real
to read.
wide. Okay, so the experimenter said they were going to play a game, brought the child into the room. The first 2 or 3 sessions served as exposure sessions to the game. So they explained what the clown game was. They called it the clown game. That even sounds creepier, but fine. And so they wanted to show the kid, like, if you touch the box, what happens, right? There's 2 boxes. One has lots of candy in it. One has 1. Then they read the rules out loud. I wanted to read the rules out loud because I think it's really helpful. First, 1 box will come out at a time. Then 2 boxes will come out. When the clown's eyes and nose come on the box, all right, nose come on, the box will come out. First, color box will come out. Now I want you to touch it for me. Now you have to wait. You can open the box now and take out whatever you earned. How many did you earn? Right. So how many did you get? Let me show you again. And then they did it again for the other side. So that's what they did for the
Okay.
pre-assessment.
There it is.
Yep. And then, all right, so they read the rules around. They praised successive approximations of touching the box until the child mastered the choice response. So they couldn't touch both. They had to touch one. That doesn't seem like it would take that long, but it's okay.
No.
At first I was like, what's the successive approximation? But then they clarified. So here, the lights in the clown, the eyes and the nose corresponded to when you could touch a box. The lights below corresponded to when the delay was on. So if there was a delay, the lights were on until the end of the delay. That's important. Note 2. So in each phase, they showed the participants what was in each box and how long they would have to wait for it. And they told which color corresponded to which reinforcer. So during the pre-assessment and post-assessment, so we should just cover them together because they're similar, they conducted these 2 to 3 times per week, and they wanted to figure out what the index point was in which choice may change from that smaller reinforcer to that larger reinforcer. So what they did is initially they had 4 forced choice trials. So just to kind of expose the students to each of the boxes, they had 2 sessions with only 1 box, and then 2 sessions with the other box alone, so that the child could experience the delay or no delay according to the box, right? So they only could choose that 1 box. Then they had 10 trials where both boxes were present, and this is where that beautiful little table comes in. The boxes are presented, they're chosen, the trial lights are turned off, and then if they chose the larger delayed reinforcer, the lights come out, the box is withdrawn, they wait, and then the reinforcer comes back, and then they can take it, and then the trial is over. Or it keeps going, right? If they engage in the smaller reinforcer choice 4 times, then the session is ended. Yeah, so colors in the pre-assessment were randomized, but then they had to change this during the training because some of the students were saying, I hate yellow because you have to wait a long time. Oh, and I don't even like pink, so I'm never going to pick pink. So then they just took 2 colors, blue and yellow, and they were the same throughout training. So it's important to note in this article, it's like a 14-page article, right? The training condition is like 3 sentences. Just putting it out there. 3 sentences, basically. So, and a lot of the things they talk about in the training are in other places. So they could have done some good reorg. So the blue box top was correlated with the single reinforcer. The yellow top was correlated with the triple reinforcer. And so they started the training at 0 delays for both. So at that first training, you could have the smaller or the larger for 0. And then once the larger was chosen, I think 3 times in a row. Yeah, 4 out of the 5 trials. then they increase the delay by 5 seconds. And that was the training.
Right.
And then, that's it. And then each time a new delay was introduced, then they said, oh, look, and they did those forced trials again, had them experience it. There was a few variations, which was funny. Subject A initially started using tokens, kind of a bad idea. The rest of the participants received their reinforcers immediately, which was a better idea. And they said sometimes we had a lot of time at the end of experimental sessions, so we just ran probes to see how long students would wait. I just like that they put that in there, like, we're just bored. We have them here. What should we do? And so what they suggested was that 4 out of the 5 participants shifted preference to the larger reinforcer from the pre-assessment to the post-assessment. That's shown on figure 4. It's a bar graph, so it's looking at the mean. A linear interpolation. So then they looked at see when the indifference point or where that index point is from the pre-assessment to the post-assessment. And so they also have a graph here where they look at the trials in which the larger reinforcer was chosen. That, for me, didn't show as much as the bar graph, even though it's the actual data, because it's a little bit messy. If I was looking at that data only, I think only 1 or 2 of the participants would have demonstrated a higher index of choosing the larger reinforcer based on what I see. But I mean, that's not what the researchers suggested when they looked at the overall, right? So they're looking at the over. They said they used a multiple baseline design. Don't see it. Yeah, don't see it in any of the graphs, but that's okay.
Pre-post mostly.
Yeah. They're like using of a multiple baseline design. I'm like, don't see it. But that's okay. It was the 80s. And so, what they suggest is that, students, just giving these students the option to experience a wait and receive reinforcement after the wait, showed, had a shift in these preferences. Subject F didn't have any training, but selected the smaller reinforcer 80% of the time. And then when the larger reinforcer and the smaller reinforcer were at the same time, they only selected the larger reinforcer half the time, suggesting that it potentially wasn't maturation for the other ones. And so they said that the training may have been effective because it increased reinforcer sensitivities, or potentially could have developed rule-governed behavior, or we could say adjunctive behavior in the absence of waiting. So some kids said, "Oh, I can wait till 20 and then I'll get the reinforcer," but we don't know that. Did they do something? Yes. Do we know why it worked? No.
Well, so we've got a couple more articles to talk about can we increase this self-control or delay of gratification, whatever we want to call it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about whether it matters. But why don't we take a little break and we'll come back and do all of that. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking about self-control. But before we continue on our discussion of this topic, I want to remind everyone that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to this episode, you can earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to the website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus. That's GET-CEUS. Enter in some information, including 2 secret code words we've hidden in the episode. Here's the first one. It's s'mores. S-M-O-R-E-S. Graham cracker, marshmallow, chocolate. Put it over fire at some point. Smoosh it together. You got yourself s'mores. I don't care for them. I would wait 1,000,000 seconds for a s'more because I don't like them.
I love them.
So you would wait 2 seconds.
Probably 5, but that's about it.
They're so good.
Okay. What if I told you to wait for 15 minutes to get 2 s'mores?
I wouldn't do it.
No.
2 s'mores
Okay.
is too
No,
much.
you don't even need to.
Okay. A lot of confounds with self-control research, huh?
Yeah.
S'mores. All right. So, Jackie, you shared kind of a classic example of, yes, we can increase self-control or delay of gratification through some elaborate clown mechanism boxed, basically by slowly increasing that delay time. There was some other research that kind of came later on that looked at, well, what if we give the children something to do during that delay time? And that showed, yes, children will wait longer if they have something to do while they are waiting. Dixon and Holcomb in the year 2000 said, what if we take both of those strategies and we try to apply it to a group design? Because, there was a run on clown board reinforcement furniture boxes in the 2000s, if you all remember that. For Y2K,
Sure that was a bespoke box.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you couldn't get them anywhere. They're all out of stock. So, can we make teaching self-control a group design? So, Dixon and Holcomb had 2 different groups, one with 3 adult men with multiple disabilities and mental health diagnoses, another with 3 adult females with similar needs at a day facility. They were looking at, all right, can we increase the amount of group task engagement for these different groups? And can we increase the amount of time that these individuals will take part in that activity while waiting for some conditioned reinforcer? In this case, it was points for a token economy that was part of their sort of overall programming. So we have this token economy where you can redeem points for soda, for cassette players, all sorts of fun activities. And the individuals were sort of started with a natural baseline. They were told, okay, everybody, here's a big stack of cards. I want you to sort them into piles by suit and go. And they pretty much just let the participants stack cards by suit until one of the members of the group stopped for 5 seconds. They just disengaged from the task. So that was their natural baseline. The goal was to see, can we increase the amount of time these individuals will stay on task and wait for some number of points by 7 times that baseline, that initial baseline amount. So in the next kind of baseline, we had 2 baselines here, the individuals are told, all right, we can give you 3 points right now, or you can wait and get 6 points. And now do your task. And basically, if they could reach 7 times that mean baseline from the natural baseline sessions, they would get the 6 points. That was considered a clinically significant increase in group work engagement. If you wonder where the 7 came from, it was arbitrary.
I love arbitrary. Let's use 7. It's a lucky number.
Yeah. And the individuals are told this is how long you're going to have to work. So the group had to unanimously choose large or small. Usually they would choose large at least the first time. And then usually after that, they would not choose large. And then it would just end either when they reached the goal or somebody stopped working for more than 5 seconds on the task. Then we get our self-control training, which was pretty much the same as it was in the Suzler-Azaroff and Schweitzer article, in which they just said, okay, you can wait immediately and get 6 points, or you can immediately get 3 points. So, of course, everyone would choose, I'd like to do I'll take the 6 points, Alex. And they would not have to do anything and they would get the 6 points. Then they increased the time to 60 seconds, then 90 seconds after a successful session where they sorted the cards for 60 seconds, then 90 seconds. And they just kept going on and on in this fashion until they reached their target goal, which was about, for one group, it was, a little under, it was like, 8 minutes. And the other group, it was about, it was a little over 12 minutes that they were engaged in these tasks. And basically what they found is that in the choice baseline, everyone wanted the big points the first time, but failed to reach the goal. And then they stopped. They just kept choosing the smaller reward. After that, you pretty much saw similar patterns. Group 1 pretty much had 1 or 2 sessions where they were not reaching their goal. Then they just started reaching the goal every single time until they reached their terminal value. There was a confound in that one of the participants no longer wanted to be part of the study. So maybe it was a little easier with just the 2 individuals. And then group 2, it took them a little longer. But again, once they kind of started reaching those initial goals and getting the 6 points, they were pretty consistently able to reach whatever the new goal was until they reached their final target 3 out of 4 times. So I guess if you want to use this sort of time delay procedure, especially if you're pairing it with some task that the individuals can be engaged in rather than sit still for 12 minutes and then something will happen, even with something as, we don't actually know how reinforcing those points were. It doesn't get discussed. There was no preference assessment. It was just something that was used in the facility. So we're assuming it had some value there. I guess you will see, an increase in self-control or an increase in that delay of gratification response. And you can run it in the context of like a group activity. So more people can learn this skill. Again, is this a valuable skill? Is it really self-control, or is it more just reinforcement of other behavior? Not quite clear. Now, my favorite study of the bunch, which I know we're getting close to where we need to really start getting to the bigger points and wrapping up. I could do a full hour just on this study alone. I will try not to. This is the Ansben-Frasca looking at gameplay as a means of teaching self-control. Why do I love this study, folks? Well, I do love games. And if you listen to our episode on leisure skills, and I talked about Rock Band for like a good 35 minutes or 40 minutes or so, this is similar in that I, A, understand a lot about games, B, understand a good amount about behavior analysis, and C, love that these two things go together because it gives me a nice perspective, I think, on this article that maybe some of you, if you don't play a lot of games, I know, Jackie, you don't play a lot of games, might not have had. So you would have hated this research study for possibly more than just the one reason. So really the purpose here was, can we teach preschool children self-control? And can we do it in the format where we use games? Because of course, the games are typically fun. They're cost effective. It doesn't cost much to run a game. It can be pretty easy to scale because most games play from, 2 to 10 people. It's often very popular to do in group settings. There's a lot more higher engagement with the task rather than just like, come on, preschoolers, we're going to sit in a circle and talk about self-control or whatever it is. And inherently, a game has repeated practice opportunities in it and also social interactions. So, hey, self-control, we know we can sort of teach something that could be self-control or could be considered self-control. So let's do it in the context of a game. Here's a giant flaw with your self-control research in which you're using a board game. There's no guarantee that what you are doing, self-control already is sort of a hard topic or a hard concept to define, I think, precisely. When you're just playing a game and saying, hey, you played the game a certain way, I don't know if that necessarily reflects self-control has been learned versus some arbitrary rule, some strategy that the child is using to win the game or to take part in the game. So I just, on its face, I sort of had a big problem with, I don't know, no matter what the results of this study are, I question whether or not it is actually measuring or accomplishing what it has set out to do. But let's let you, the listeners at home, decide. So we had a number of 4 and 5-year-olds who were recruited to play a game that was supposed to promote self-control behaviors. How did it do that? Well, let me tell you about Gem Heroes, a game for 2 kids and 1 adult, or 1 kid and 2 adults. For preschoolers that will teach them delay of gratification, ? The power has gone out in Futureville because the crystal is broken. You must collect gems and win the game by having the most gems at the end. Spin your spinner to move on the board. If you get to a POW space, you can choose whether you'd like a gem or a sidekick. I'm going to stop my ad read for a second there and let you know that the gems were considered the preferred item because they're gems, they're sparkly. I don't know.
So they're very sparkly.
They didn't do a preference assessment. They didn't like throw gems all over the place and like bait the environment to see if kids looked for gems all over. So number one, did the kids actually care about these stupid gems as anything other than a piece?
The gems are how you win the game.
Yes, the gems are how you win the game. But the sidekick is like some little piece, right? The kids might like the little piece too.
They said they were very boring looking.
They were very boring. Yes, because they looked boring, the kids won't like them. That's the science that I love. However, the sidekick will help you later. So I'll get back to my ad read. At the POW space, you can choose a gem, which you need to rebuild the crystal, or the sidekick, which later on will help you earn more gems, because later on you'd get to a place called a gate. There were 2 spaces where you can trade in your sidekick for multiple gems, a reliable, bigger later choice. The adult models the behavior being like, this sidekick's sure going to help me out. I'm going to use the sidekick, and they'd pick the sidekick. So already what you're looking at is the idea that, okay, the delay of gratification task is you don't want this stupid gem. You want to wait and get the sidekick who's boring, but later he's worth most of the gems, which I know you really want. So again, is this really a measure of delay of gratification, or is this rules to some arbitrary board game? Hard to say. At the end of the game, or about halfway through the game, just to make it really clear that the coolest thing was having the gems, they added a power crystal design where the kids could put their gem pieces on the design picture. The reason they added this was because there's some research pointing to self-regulation skills increase when you add complexity over time. Okay, sure. So again, even though the boring sidekick might have been learned, hey, I want the boring sidekick because that allows me to win the game more likely. But now you've got a fun new, this is in quotes, fun new opportunity to engage with them in the short term, them being the gems. Again, a lot of assumption about how awesome these freaking gems are in the game. So we had about 25 kids playing Gem Heroes, and 23 got to play the control game, Zingo, which we all love Zingo. It's like a bingo game with the little chunk, little machine that lets you get the cards, little plastic pieces out. And what they look at is they videotape the kids and say, okay, how many times did the children playing Gem Heroes choose the gem versus choosing the sidekick? Then after that, they would do a delay of gratification assessment, a pretty much modified version of the Marshmallow Test, but they got chocolate or a marshmallow. And again, same thing. They had two. They could either choose 2 right now or 6 later. They kept the whole bell ringing piece. And they also used a 1 to 3 fun face scale to say, hey, which of you kids like Gem Heroes? How much do you kids like Zingo? So again, more and more this article is reading like, man, we really want to sell this Gem Heroes game. So let's get our scientists from Hasbro together to prove that it's a scientific game. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cast...
It's not a real game.
No, it's not a real game. I don't mean to cast aspersions on the ethics of the scientist, but it had a kind of a weird... my cousin needs to offload these Gem Heroes games, so here's
so many gems.
We got so many gems. How are we gonna get rid of these gems?
I did some gamification research, and it gets weird quick. It really does.
We did a whole episode on gamification, and I think that was my problem there. Of like, this seems like cool research that seems to work, but why? And a bunch of garbage.
You're like, let's add levels, let's add badges, let's add points.
I hate
why?
That stuff.
It's fun.
I mean, I like gamification, but I just hate the idea of like results. Maybe keep doing stuff.
Well, there's very little research out there.
Yes, and what it is, it literally reads like results. Maybe keep doing stuff. Anywho, what are the results of Gem Heroes and everything here? So we look at our results here. Did this work? The kids who played the Gem Heroes game, you did see, they said 7.12 times more likely to increase their wait times. They certainly were better at choosing the sidekick over the gems from game 1 to game 2, but then it never changed again. Like once they figured out that they got the sidekicks, it seems like they just picked that strategy over and over. Is that really self-control, or did they just learn how to win the game? When you compare the results, there is a slight difference, but the median amount of time that the intervention group kids would wait in the delay of gratification test was like 11 seconds. And there was this wide range from negative 394 seconds to 564 seconds. Whereas the median change for the interventions, the kids playing Zingo, was they lost 7 seconds. But again, the range was negative 277 up to waiting 572 seconds. So we're really not looking at results that I would consider incredibly enticing or exciting, because even if there was some improvement in self-control or delay of gratification with the intervention group, it was very minor. We're talking maybe a couple minutes, but possibly just a few seconds. And it really wasn't, much difference on the whole between the two groups. Most of the kids kind of liked it, though they all got bored. So whereas Zingo, man, the kids loved Zingo at the beginning and they loved Zingo at the end. So isn't that good? They did a second study. I'm not going to go into it, but basically they just added some components where they do a pre-game simulation. They coached kids to do psychological distancing, which pretty much meant you want to be a superhero, right? Superheroes believe in patience and they'll wait for things. They only, let them play some of the game to start. Then they added more components of the full game later on. Sort of with, I think, the sense that they'd have more decision points. The children would have more repetition and learn the skill better. And actually the results here were almost, no difference. The kids learned to play the game as well, but there was even less of a difference between the intervention and control group in terms of delay of gratification responses. So what do the results say? Results from this pair of studies support continued investigation of the Gem Heroes board game, which to me reads like, how can we say nothing interesting happened in a way that makes it sound like you should keep exploring this board game? Is my read on that. It was decently fun. Maybe it was a really cool looking game. Maybe it would be a fun game to play. Does it teach self-control skills? That's really
Hard to say.
questionable. Yes, more research is needed. Though if I were a betting man, I would probably not bet my money on this being the be all end all self-control teaching skill game of the millennium. Anywho, those are can we. Now let's talk a little bit more about should we. I mean, our results were sort of all over the place in terms of can we even increase this skill called self-control? Maybe we can. It seems in some situations we can. But is it going to be relevant? Certainly, I think when we talk about should we, really relevant in the sense of should we be spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on self-control training for young children because we know if we do, they will all go to Stanford University or whatnot. Diana, what do you think? We've got rational snacking, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, revisiting of the marshmallow test with statistics. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so the idea here, why we have this whole body of research, is because of that initial Michel 1972 study, which said, okay, 75% of the children failed to wait for 15 minutes in order to get the double marshmallow snack. And then when they checked in with those kids later, they found that those who had waited were doing better on a whole host of measures, right?
A bevy of measures, you might say.
Even a full bevy. So they were more self-confident. They had better interpersonal skills. They had higher SAT scores. They had less substance abuse. And Michel even went as far as to call it, quote, an early indicator of an apparently long-term personal quality. So this was uproarious, right? And oh my gosh, all we need to do is teach kids how to wait when they're very young, and we're going to see all of these additional beneficial effects from it. So this whole body of research has stemmed from that. However, as we can see, sometimes we're able to teach this. We're certainly able to teach, we've talked in other contexts about delay tolerance training and things like that, and we certainly can teach folks to wait, engage in other activities. But when we're talking about this, more conceptually complex idea of self-control, the potential benefits of that get called into question later on in this line of research. It says, and the studies that we're going to talk about now are some of the ones that bring that into question. So Michel's initial findings came under fire, I guess you could say, later on, because other researchers wanted to look to see if they could replicate those findings, and they weren't really getting the same results of the same magnitude. And they said, this was a very specific and small population that the initial study was done with, and maybe it's possible that there were unaccounted for environmental variables in those studies that were really uncontrolled for. So if we were to look at a larger swath of the population that had more variant in it to start with, would we see that some of those differences in what they were calling self-control were really more due to the children's current or past environmental circumstances, and those were making contributions toward their decisions to either take the marshmallow while they had the chance or wait for more marshmallows. And the researchers in the kid study, which is the one I'm talking a little bit about their intro right now, said that if let's think about a child who has not had a past history of having adults act reliably, or who is maybe around other children, all of whom have limited access to resources. So if you have a toy, you need to hang on to that toy for now. If you have an opportunity to eat a meal, you should go ahead and eat that meal, because you don't really know where your next one might be coming from. So in that situation, what they call the rational response, which is the response that's most likely to produce reinforcement, would be to go ahead and take the smaller now versus wait for a longer one later that may not actually come. So they said, the Michel study may not have taken into consideration some of these additional factors, which may have long-term implications for how we think about self-control and whether it really is that quote-unquote innate personal quality versus more of an environmental or product of the environment. So the kids study really wanted to delve into this more, and they said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a microcosm of reliability versus unreliability specific to the experimenter in this study, and see if that has an effect for a whole new round of participants and their performance on the marshmallow test. So they had 28 kids ages 3 to 5. The mean age was 4.5, and they were assigned to either a reliable or an unreliable condition. And they, kept the groups equal, and everyone got a goodie bag and $10 at the end, plus additional marshmallows. Just so you all know, everyone got marshmallows.
Yay. No pretzels?
No. No one, only the marshmallows, really.
We've learned one thing from research. Marshmallows beat pretzel.
That's right. So the part 1 of this project was the part where they established the experimenter as reliable or unreliable. So they had the child come in and they said, we're going to do an art project. And the art project
And
was...
they said, I'm reliable or I'm unreliable.
I'm the most unreliable adult you've ever met. No, so the project was a create your own cup project where they were going to color like little insert that goes inside a cup. We used to have some of those.
Yes,
they were from Starbucks.
Don't put those in your washing machine, folks. Your dishwasher. They will die.
Okay, is that where they went? They're dead.
Yes.
Okay, so the participant either was going to color their cup insert or put stickers on it. So they were given either a little used container of crayons or one measly sticker. And both of those were designed to be difficult/impossible to actually open because they wanted them to experience waiting to gain access to the items.
Those both sound horrible, by the way. They just sound horrible.
Oh, that they couldn't get into it or that it was just boring?
Both.
Oh, yeah. So the experimenter said, I have this right now, but wait here. I think I have more new, better material, so let me go get that instead. So they left them with the old materials. And if the child was in the reliable group, then the experimenter returned in 2.5 minutes with either a brand new, very fancy carousel of crayons, like just thinking about that makes me very excited, or a new set of 5 to 7 beautiful character-themed stickers that have been selected based on that participant's interests. So those were very good replacement items, right? So the participants in that group learned through that experience, this experimenter told me they were going to do something, and then they did it. Or the participants in the unreliable group, the experimenter said, hang on, I have new materials. They left for 2.5 minutes, and they came back and said, sorry, I was wrong. We don't have any more. We're just going to use these instead. And then they opened it for them. So they did access that one, but just not as good.
They should have come back in and said, oh man, I forgot you were here.
Oh no.
Sorry, I didn't even look for those. I'm unreliable, like I said.
Right. So the participants in that group learned that this experimenter, if they say they're going to do something, they may not actually do the thing. All right. So then they finished the cup coloring project. And now we were moving on to part 2, which was the marshmallow test. So this was the same for both groups. Now the experimenter said, oh my goodness, now it's snack time. You have your choice of snack. Here, I'm reading. This is exactly what they said. You can eat this one marshmallow right now, or if you can wait for me to go get more marshmallows from the other room, you can have 2 marshmallows to eat instead. And then the child responded and they said, okay, I'm going to go get more marshmallows from the other room and turn your picture into a cup. You should stay right here in that chair. Can you do that? And the child responded, and then they said, I'll leave the marshmallow right here, and if you haven't eaten it when I come back, you get 2 marshmallows instead. That was the instructions. They did not require the bell.
No bell.
Right? But they had a 15-minute window, so the child could wait. If they waited for 15 minutes, then they got the 2 marshmallows, and if not, then they ate the marshmallow before the 15 minutes was up. So the way that they measured this was a latency measure to the first lick or bite of the marshmallow. Even though this is like in the psychological study, we have a measure that we most definitely would also use behaviorally. So that was nice. We just didn't get a pretty graph. That was the only thing. We had to interpret it statistically. They did IOA on it. That was all good. And then they also measured smiling, a admittedly subjective measure of quote-unquote contentedness, and fidgetiness.
Your definition of smiling just got worse when you added contentedness article.
And the fidgetiness was measured based on how many pixels changed on a computer screen in the first 30 seconds of the interval, which was kind of a cool way to look at fidgetiness.
The video they were watching.
The video. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. Okay, so results in the unreliable condition, the children waited a mean of 3 minutes and 2 seconds before eating the marshmallow. Only one of the 14 children waited the whole 15 minutes. In the reliable condition, the children waited a mean of 12 minutes and 2 seconds. And 9 of the 14 in that group waited for the whole 15 minutes. So obviously, these were statistically significant findings because a huge difference between these two groups. Age and gender were not predictive of the wait. Neither were contentedness, smiling, or fidgeting. Nothing except whether they were in the reliable or the unreliable group was indicative of whether they would wait for that longer period of time. So this would suggest that it really was those environmental variables and the history that they had with that particular experimenter that changed their delay toward gratification. And it was really, I think we could interpret it as environmentally specific, right? Mm-hmm. So that puts a whole different light on those initial Michel findings and adds the potential that there were other variables that may have potentially been in play there that should also be considered. So what they had to say about that was, quote, performance on sustained delay of gratification tasks can be strongly influenced by rational decision-making processes. And remember, they were defining rational as the child making the decision that would give them the most likely access to the reinforcer. And that would clearly vary based on their recent history and exposure to the quote-unquote reliableness of the person who's providing access to that.
That could also explain the results of the Gem Heroes board game and that they watched someone else do it and they said, oh, looks like they got all the gems. I'll do that one.
Yeah. So, I like this study, obviously, because it fits right into what I see as behavior analytic framework, right? We're not saying that, you're born with more self-control, but rather it's learned behavior, and it's not only learned, but likely highly dependent on current environmental variables and circumstances.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then to cap it all off, so certainly I think, Dinah, this was a great study in terms of the idea of what other factors might be responsible for self-control other than your self-control homunculus. And I think when we look at the Watts, Duncan, and Kwan study, while it is more about kind of statistics related to longitudinal data sets that were collected over the years rather than a direct experiment, it does call into question statistically even, do the Michel and Shota results hold up all the time? Or was that a very specific subset of participants who ended up with a very specific subset of results over a period of time? And this was the authors, so Watts, Duncan, and Kwan in 2018 sort of looked at this from a couple angles. One being that the original study, so the original Michel groups, they had about 600 participants, but over the years when they do the longitudinal studies or they look at this factor of growth or that factor of cognition, the numbers of participants used decreased quite a bit. So there are some other limiting factors that were discussed. One of them being that almost all of the studies use these kind of bivariate correlates. So meaning it was, we're going to look at this compared to that and didn't take into account a lot of other confounds that may also be able to explain the overall results. So this was considered a conceptual replication of the original studies using a modified version of the Marshmallow Test, which again, I think is a weakness to the Watts, Duncan, and Kwan study in that the Marshmallow Test results they were using only looked at 7-minute time frames, which were ceilings for lots of students. And I know they statistic out a lot of that as a problem, but that sort of always leaves me feeling a little like, are we just getting all these numbers out in the wash? We're getting these results out by just, we do enough statistics and it doesn't matter.
It must be boring to wait for a child to eat a marshmallow for 15 minutes.
They didn't have the money. They didn't have the grant money to wait for the full 15. So the data they used, rather than actually running these studies and then waiting years and years and years, were from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development Study of Early Childcare and Youth Development, or then NICHD SECCYD, in which there were...
The Nixon.
So all sorts of tests were run, tests on cognition, tests on achievement, delay of gratification tests. And these were done as kind of for preschoolers. They did the delay of gratification as well as many of these other tests. And then they do these tests at first grade. And then again, when the child was 15, they would do all these other tests. They'd look at things like the mother's education level. They look at observational data based on how this child did at home, all sorts of stuff. And a lot of statistics were then done to determine whether there was any significance between the delay of gratification scores and future scores in a variety of arenas such as behavior, academic achievement, cognition, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the crux of the study. You certainly could read the study, they go into a lot more detail as to exactly what they did, exactly which test they used. But I think the big take home really comes into a kind of a quick summary of the results.
So, in a quick summary of the results, they found a small statistical significance, which was similar to that seen in previous research in type, between delay of gratification and then later achievement scores. However, it was a much smaller level of significance than they had seen in previous studies, and it was basically summarized as children who could wait 1 additional minute at age 4 worked out to be, on average, 1/10 of a standard deviation higher in their academic achievement scores around age 15. But that's not really that much. And then when you add in the children who were older than 4 years old to the sample, it took out any significance to the findings. So once you put that group back in, because it was very close on the P level there, it reduced it down to non-significant levels. And they said the piece that really seemed to be the most important was that if children could wait at least 20 seconds, then all of the other factors kind of washed out.
Yep.
So it was really that subset of children did not wait for 20 seconds, and that was when some of these additional factors may have come into play. I thought you were going to say something, Jackie.
I said, now I want to wake my child up and time it if it's 20 seconds because she's 4, right? I'd be like, okay, can you wait? I want that 1/10 of a standard deviation.
Right. So it's really not that much, though. So, I think I couldn't tell if they were surprised that they didn't get the same findings or if they were maybe expecting.
Yeah, I think they were. The tone of the article did feel like they were sort of expecting that they were probably not going to get as good a set of results because that already had sort of come out in some other research of those results were good, but they're not always playing out quite that well for other researchers.
Yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No,
right?
That's why we replicate.
Right, exactly. And, this would indicate that I think if, the child's waiting for less than 20 seconds, and that could be indicative of lots of other things that might be going on there that aren't related specifically to delay of gratification behavior. So even that doesn't necessarily tell me that much about self-control specifically. Then they also, went through and looked at other measures and potential correlations too. They did not see correlation between delay of gratification and measures of attention, impulsivity, and self-control on the Woodcock-Johnson. They saw some correlation between delay of gratification and what they called, or what the Woodcock-Johnson called applied problems, which is sort of like a general cognitive measure. However, for me, that brought me back to what I said at the beginning, which is one needs to understand the rule that's presented in order to fully participate in the self-control test, right? So if you have more limited verbal understanding of these types of rule-governed behavior, then that may be more challenging for you. So maybe that was at play here too. They also they did divide the data up into higher and lower SES groups. It was partially determined by the mother's education level, and they thought that they might see some correlations there using that breakdown. They also did not see correlations for the group that had the lower SES or the higher of self-reported risky behavior or impulse control challenges as teenagers. There was no correlation between that and their delay of gratification scores when they were younger either.
So I guess when it comes down to it, it does seem that the Marshmallow Test might not be the benchmark of future greatness that it has been thought to be for so long. Now, that doesn't mean that delay of gratification might not be an important skill in some manner, but it may also be that what we think of as self-control isn't well defined enough to pinpoint what are the relevant measures here that could have a causation with later success. And it doesn't seem that there is any one skill right now that sort of would fall into the category of self-control that is that kind of pinnacle of skill building.
Well, sort of like, the way in which we teach higher order math in high school. Like, you're not really going to use that skill 95% of people aren't going to use higher order math. And if you make the argument, oh, but it's a method for understanding critical thinking, or it's a method for understanding problem solving, well, there's lots and lots of different methods that one could use if that's your end goal. It doesn't have to be done through mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Same idea, right? If we're thinking of self-control as a correlate or a method of reaching some of these other end goals, I don't know that we really have the research here to suggest that that's the path that we need to go down, even if those end goals are good goals to be working toward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I pulled into dissemination station.
You did it. You skidded right in.
We're going to crash.
So I guess if we had to wrap up all of the research that we've discussed in terms of the can, in terms of the should, where do you see self-control now? Important, not important, worthwhile, changeable?
I don't think self-control literature should specifically look at reinforcers and the edible nature, because there's so many things that go along with that. So I think you should be thinking about other things, right? Because I think you should probably be doing secondary reinforcers instead of primary reinforcers. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, I don't know that using this operational definition for what we think of as self-control is that useful outside of the context of these types of studies.
Sorry, self-control researchers.
Yeah,
like,
I think we should be casting a wider net in how we define it, and then, breaking that down into our conceptually systematic principles. And then also thinking about what our end goals are for these types of skills, and then maybe working on them in a more direct fashion.
Mm-hmm. I think this also reflects, I think a lot of challenges in science is that when these sort of strong correlations get hot, they get publicity, there
hot right now.
There just seemingly is this drive to, we have to explain this phenomenon, and how it's usually explained is these inherent skills. And it's not always clear, well, what would you do with this information? How would we turn this into actionable response? And sometimes even jumping to, how do we make this a skill that we can teach, before I think we could put to bed the question, is this a worthwhile skill to be taught? We had so many studies we talked about where, like, look at all the delay of gratification that was taught. And I think really only one or two of them did we even feel that there was something to build on or something worth replicating potentially. And, you can always replicate.
Yeah,
you can always
this
extend.
Isn't our area of research either, right? So
I'm more talking Gem Heroes. I'm bashing on Gem Heroes today. Got to play test that one a little bit more at your local comic book
and I
shop.
think we can think about, real life times in which it's good to delay gratification.
Yes.
Right? If you are always engaging in the impulsive response, then there are going to be long-term outcomes for that. So this area of research is not without merit, but the marshmallow test itself is like a kind of like a weird, like, alley to go down as far as the metaphor for the larger picture.
It was a starting point, right? It's not the ending point.
Yeah.
And I think Michelle even wrote, I think it was someone recently wrote a book about the idea of self-control. And I certainly didn't have time to read the book in preparation for this episode, but it did look like kind of like reading the summary on Amazon. It did seem more like the idea of, like, self-control is an important skill. And I feel like even with all the research done, the summary they came up with made it sound like one of those business books about, like, use a checklist to help you organize your day, or how Outlook calendar is your best friend. So less about self-control as this sort of internal ability that only some of us possess, and more just, here are some rules that allow me to, engage in goal-directed behavior and reach milestones more effectively, which I don't believe any of the research we looked at got at, sort of what is it going to look like in life, so much as, if you don't eat the marshmallow, then success. But what happened in between there? And even if you could change that 20 seconds, I'm pretty sure we could change every child to be able to wait 20 seconds for a marshmallow. But does that mean that everyone is going to go off to Harvard and Stanford? Not necessarily. So this was fun. I think self-control was fun. These certainly were a lot of fun articles. Whether there's anything in here that is, going to shift how I think about life or development, or, oh no, my kid ate the marshmallow, forget it. I'm gonna blow that college fund on an RV because they're not gonna get in, right? I don't
Maybe there's
think
some
so.
genetic component there.
Is my impulsivity? Am I buying impulsivity?
Yes.
Whoopsie doodle. Well, I I didn't eat the marshmallow, so that's the thing. I could pass the marshmallow test, no problem. I could go all day. I don't like marshmallows. That's why I'm such a success.
But also, you can entertain yourself forever.
That's true. I can. That's how I made this. That's how we made this podcast. It's like, well, we'll just keep talking about gem heroes. Anywho,
But guess what?
let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up. I can have self-control about that. Thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate that you subscribe, left reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. It means so much to us and really helps us get the word out about ABA Inside Track. There are a couple other ways that we would love to hear from you or get in touch with you. Certainly one is by having you go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, find links to all of these articles so you can do some of the reading and thinking of yourself as well. Maybe you have a different point of view that you'd like to share with us on social media or our email at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. If you'd like to see these episodes, quote unquote, see these with subtitling feature, you can also find these all on our YouTube page. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track, including getting these episodes a week ahead of time, some bonus live episodes, and access to our super long book club podcast where we talk about a topic for way longer than this, and it's a book rather than just one piece of research or a few pieces of research, you can join us on Patreon, where subscriptions start at just $3 a month. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Well, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Diana. Also, thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his editing work. We'll be back next week with another episode. I hope you can all delay gratification. And I know one thing you are delaying gratification for is that second secret code word. I almost got you. You're all successes. You're all going to Stanford. Congrats. That second code word is sapphire. Sapphire. It is a bluish stone?
Yep.
Ooh, all right. A magic stone and a magic code word. If I give you one sapphire and you can wait, I'll give you 2 special stones 15 minutes from now. But we'll have turned off the podcast by then. So sorry. Anyway, we'll see you all next week. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.